Good morning, everyone. I'm just waiting for our speaker to join us, and then we'll move forward with the introduction. Maybe just morning, Deirdre. So I'll just get started with the introduction, and maybe as the presentation goes on, you might answer any questions you've got in the Q&A rather than in the chat. I suppose as I reflect on our profession, and it is a profession, and I think about it, we're a profession with over 100 years of published research as an evidence base for our work. And I suppose when I think back to that, the one that sticks in my head from whenever I trained, which is many, many years ago, would have been work undertaken by Frank Parsons, who talked about people needing to have a clear understanding of themselves, knowledge of the requirements and conditions of the workplace for success, and then to have some true reasoning of those facts in order to make a decision. And of course, while elements of that ring true, when Parsons put that forward as a theory, the workforce comprised of men, and women, if they work, tended to be in domestic service. So thankfully, the world has moved on from that, and it's gone through many, many different changes, as you well know, through world wars, through increased participation in the workplace, globalization, and most recently, I suppose, technology and the use of artificial intelligence. And I suppose what's emerging now from the student base is maybe a need for more personalized services. So we live in a very challenged profession. It's a profession that I don't think gets a recognition it should. And I think sometimes we're not great at also pushing to our bosses and to our leaders that we are a research evidence-based profession, and that evidence base feeds into practice, and that as practitioners, we get together in forums like this to share our experiences. And it's excellent innovation today that we have our students with us too, representation from across the island. And I have no doubt that that will add real value and a real sense of grounding our work in the needs of our clients and of our students. Deirdre Hughes is no stranger to many of us in AHECS, and I've known Deirdre for a very long time myself. I'm really fascinated by the idea of where will our profession be in 10 years' time? What will careers, education, information, advice, and guidance look like in a decade? And Deirdre is someone who has been able to mix that idea of being a researcher, being a practitioner, being a thought leader, being a developer and an innovator, an advisor to not only people like myself, but to governments right around the world, recently completing work in Canada, the north and the south of Ireland on different projects, and in Australia, and right across the globe. There's not many people better placed to take us through our next session. And I welcome you, Deirdre, to the AHECS Conference 2022. And I'd just like to hand over to you now. Thanks, Deirdre. Deirdre, we can't hear you. No, we're still having difficulties with your sound. Not quite sure, Deirdre. We're getting like a clicking noise. No, we're still getting an element of interference there. Maybe get a sort of maybe go out of the conference and sign back in again. hopefully, folks, Deirdre will come back in. Otherwise, your 45 minutes of me trying to fill, which mightn't be the most pleasant of experiences for all of you. I think that interest that Deirdre has shown in the career theory and fading into professional practice is really important for us, and it's something that we need as a profession in order to be recognised and to be seen as leaders in our area. I think the landscape's become so busy recently with so many people, career consultants, or seeing themselves as career consultants in inverted commas without necessarily having that professional education and expertise behind them. And while it's important that we all use best use of the resources available to us, we need experts like Deirdre. Deirdre, you're just right on cue. Experts like Deirdre to lead us in the development of our profession. Deirdre,
No,
hopefully,
I'm hoping you can hear me okay.
Hear you clearly.
Oh, great. Isn't technology wonderful? I was speaking in the round tables earlier, but I'm here, and thank you so much, David, and thank you, colleagues, for the very, very warm introduction. I've got just less than an hour with you all, and I have to say it is a real delight, and I love the title Aftershocks and Opportunities, and I'm particularly delighted that we have students in the audience today, because I hope that as part of this conference, this student voice can come through loud and clear, and I'll explain why. I'm going to just share my screen, but as I do so, I just want to say that Bernard is a tough act to follow, I have to say. I thought some of the sort of examples that he gave us were fantastic, and I am going to touch as part of my presentation in the later part about that psychological safety that's needed by individuals in not just learning in an educational perspective, but in work as well. So I've chosen Careers Transformation and Innovation as my title. And I did that really for three reasons. One, you all know, regardless of whether you're a work placement officer, an employer, a student, a careers advisor, that higher education career services in Ireland, UK, and globally have rapidly had to move their provision to online during COVID, facilitating careers fairs, online interviews, assessment, group work, and delivering innovative ways of keeping students and graduates successfully engaged in learning and work. I think secondly, the pandemic has sort of spurred us to really tackle some long-standing issues that perhaps some critics of higher education would say that they haven't been sufficiently attentive to matters such as accessibility, well-being, and equality. And this is contested. So I thought I'd start off, with a little bit of a kind of contesting that what critics of higher education might say, that local people, local services are really important in a period of major transformation. And then thirdly, students, and if you are one in the audience, you're becoming more discerning than ever. What do you expect from university and what you demand really? To some extent, you want clarity and you want certainty about your student and your learner experiences. You want good pastoral care and you want employability. And most importantly, certainly here in the UK, what students are looking for is value for money. So just to sort of set the scene around this topic really of aftershocks and opportunities, I thought what I'd do is I would sort of cover this in like 4 little chunks, as it were. So I'm going to spend sort of a few minutes talking about context, about career, about Ireland, about some of the shifts that are taking place that really require us all to find new personal strategies, but also organizational strategies that support individuals to construct and reconstruct themselves, as well as tackling inequalities. And most importantly, if you're someone who I was listening to on the round table that I was part of, the need to address this underutilization of skills. How can you get the message out there to individuals and to an employer that actually lifelong learning and skills really, really do matter, and that whichever organization you're in, there is a real demand for a stronger talent pipeline. And where else would we look to on the news this morning? There was an image of Dublin with the airport, and we were just talking about this in the round tables of the queues because there's not enough staff trained and qualified. And we're beginning to see this as a kind of global, certainly Western trend around this underutilization of skills. So I want to sort of look at career support and lifelong learning. I want to introduce some digital challenges, and I'm going to be joined by my colleague Andy Coates, who's a program developer. And Andy's going to do a little showcase of an innovation that I've been involved in that I want to illustrate how that can actually help us think about digital innovation. And then most importantly, we'll have a look at career development and well-being. I've just put up this image that I wanted to share with you, which shows you how in China they had to transform and adapt, as it were, during COVID. And I'm just wanting you to maybe put in the chat facility now, think of something, an example of how you had to transform your life during COVID, either professionally or personally. And I can't see the chat because I'm sharing my screen, but I will come back to it at some stage so that we can have a look. But here's an example in China where personalization of the student experience really, really was important, particularly around graduation. And this is just an illustration of how, in essence, all of us are having to think outside of the box now around how do we personalize services and make them meaningful for learners. And of course, career is a complex and contentious term, particularly in a COVID context, because jobs and roles and study routes and pathways are changing rapidly. And for some, job security has abruptly and cruelly diminished, in some cases without much warning. So in your really important work, whether you're a work placement advisor, a careers advisor, whether you're an employer or indeed a student, what's really important for us all to be aware is that societies everywhere are undergoing a deep transformation, not just COVID, but Industry 4.0, rapid technological development, climate change, and aging workforce. These are sort of new realities. And David mentioned Frank Parsons' work at the start of the Industrial Revolution. You know, what Parsons was concerned about were that people were actually moving into cities and were actually facing poverty, homelessness, a crisis, and that they saw careers advice and career development as a way to actually help bridge the gap between unemployment and indeed meaningful work or learning experiences. And so just this week in Ireland, of course, your system worldwide is highly regarded in offering high quality programs. And Minister Harris here, you can see the latest announcement. But I thought it was interesting what Minister Harris was saying, where he was emphasizing this current economic climate, new technologies, and business practices are on the rise. But there are still issues such as climate change that need to be addressed. And the two golden words that he used in his speech were that lifelong learning is essential to ensure employability, meet societal needs, and enable personal fulfillment. And you can see here from the Higher Education Authority, there is some good news around non-progression rates amongst first-year students in higher education are continuing to trend slowly downwards compared to, say, 10 years ago. So if you're working, as I know many of you are, you're all doing something really, really good, and you're making a difference, because we are actually seeing a change. So I suppose I wanted to share this image with you because you and I know, for ourselves and for the people that we serve, upskilling is really important for everyone, regardless of your occupation or your current skill levels, or indeed your circumstances. And in Ireland, I can see in higher education the expansion of higher education institutions. And I think what unites every one of us here today is that we're all committed to make things work. So here's an example where you have to think outside of the box. And I'm going to encourage you, as we go along, to actually be thinking about using this quiet time to see how can you think outside of the box, and how can you actually further enhance the great work that you're doing already. So I wanted just very quickly to use this macro overview of sustainability and the UN goals, because wherever you are in the world, these goals are really the foundations of our society. And in essence, I find them quite helpful for thinking about collaborative, experiential, and community-based learning that can address the issues that students really care about. And you can see there are so many big challenges in our society today. I won't name them all. But for each and every one of us, we have to learn to thrive, and we have to learn to survive. And part of that is developing skills. And employers and individuals have an appetite for can-do. And somehow in higher education and the great work that you do, you have to help develop agility and resilience, not just for the students that you are serving, or if you're a student, not just for yourself, but for everybody around you as well. And it kind of links into what Bernard was saying around how do we build sort of teamwork, and how do we move forward. Now, David and I didn't rehearse this, but I did think that maybe I should just very quickly give you an overview of theory. But if I could see your faces now, you're probably thinking, oh no, she's not going to go into all this theoretical heavy-duty stuff. And I'm not, so I hope that breathes a sigh of relief. But what I do want to do is emphasize that point that David made, that actually career development is underpinned by a whole range of theoretical academic perspectives. And if anyone ever challenges the idea that career is something, you know, that's just kind of made up, well, actually, it has been made up over time, and over the decades, the whole concept of career has changed. And I'm going to invite you to put into the chat facility, what do you think career means to you now in 2022? And the reason I'm asking you that is that career, particularly for students who are going through this major transformation, and we as support workers are also going through this, it's really, really important that we stop for a moment and think about the pace of change that's taking place. So who would have thought 5 years ago that I would be able to go down to my garage and pick up my parcel and be able to do all sorts of things that I couldn't do. And I was born in the 60s. So look at this overview of how the world was in the 60s. It was all about Procter & Gamble and Walmart. Then move forward to 2018, and it was all about Uber and Airbnb and Amazon. And now fast forward to, let's say, 2025. What will our world look like? What will we really be looking at when it comes to higher education, employer engagement, and this whole student experience? And I find it quite helpful, and I hope that this might be helpful to you, is not just to think about the student experience, but to think about the personalized experience, to think about the customer or consumer experience, and also to think about the learner experience in terms of all those extracurricular activities as well. And this is something from KPMG, who incidentally, KPMG in a 2020 survey looked at attitudes to higher education in 11 countries and territories. And 61% of respondents said that a degree was less valuable than a year ago. And here in the UK, only 44% thought the benefits outweighed the expense. The OECD also in 2020 had another study of 13 countries, and it was sort of looking at the total expenditure that had doubled per student from 1995 to 2015. And one of the findings from the OECD was that the gloss had come off higher education with some employers. This constant mantra for you want job-ready graduates. And to some extent, the work that you do, and particularly I want to commend this organisation for all the work that it's done, particularly people in their spare time on top of the day jobs. You're constantly wanting to push really the agenda forward around how can you either transform or how can you optimize the services that you provide. And I think these two kind of concepts can be quite useful, and I'm going to encourage you just to have a think really here about whether in your service at the moment, if you look here on the left, the kind of transformation agenda, whether you're looking just at performance, you're looking at how that aligns to change, you're looking at disruption, or maybe actually you have a more strategic ambition and that your value proposition or maybe your model is changing. Wherever you are really on that continuum, I think the most important thing when we look at higher education services across the world, and indeed other education settings like schools and colleges, is that we are at a pivotal point now around thinking about, are we optimizing the services that we provide? And to what extent are we ready for transformation? And I think one of these quotes from the World Economic Forum is quite useful, which it says, we have to shift to learning from anywhere approach. So we're learning now, either in our office, in our bedroom, in another space at work. We're learning to be flexible in how we can pick up CPD and how we can network with others. But basically, the real sort of challenge is whether we can move to, sorry, my slide moved, whether we can kind of move to this more immersive approach, which the World Economic Forum is recommending. And so I'll say a few words about what that means in terms of a more immersive approach. Now, I thought I could pick out all of the global trends and share them with you, and I've just sort of highlighted here for you. Here are some of the big sort of global trends that are taking place. Personalization and embedding employability in lifelong learning is the number one sort of trend that we see happening, not just in Ireland, but elsewhere. Each and every one of you will know that higher education is now borderless, in that students can study from anywhere and indeed pick up modules of all sorts, either through public organisations or through private organisations. And I do want to recognise that for everyone who's involved in this conference, you may feel a bit uncertain at the moment around hybrid delivery. I know that in some universities there is a very, very strong desire and indeed a commitment to bring more students back onto campus. And the reason for that being concerns about students' well-being, the need for socialisation, the need to actually really connect with people and to have teamwork and indeed this whole concept of learning for others. But you, maybe like me, have been used to 2 years where we've been working from home. And so that hybrid delivery model will bring some challenges going forward around what we want as individuals and what institutions are, indeed, if you're a student, what an employer will expect from you. I think the lifestyle integration and values as well is something to take into account when you think about personalization of services and that student, the learner, the customer experience. And I think most importantly, what we're seeing really is this whole notion around which students do you want to serve or do you need to serve, and how will you personalize your service delivery model? And what's the most important learning, personal, and if you like, customer experiences that you can provide in this context of such a lot of change taking place, not least digitally native cohorts? So I don't know about you, but certainly I feel every week I'm learning something new about a new platform, a new digital skill that I didn't know I could do. And my goal is always to surprise my 2 children who are in their 30s and to be one step ahead in showing them that I am quite digital savvy, even though indeed in practice I'm not. So I think for each and every one of us, we've got to think about, are we designing services that actually meet the needs of digital native cohorts? Now, David talked about impact, and David talked about the need for us to show that we have a strong evidence base. And I know in some of the tables I sat in this morning, some of you were quite new. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second because I'm getting a call from Ireland. Hello? Sorry, I do apologize, folks. I'm going to stop for a second and stop sharing. I'm going to just stop sharing for a moment, partly because I am wanting to have a quick look. And what's the chances of someone from Ireland ringing me when I am on an online keynote presentation speaking to people in Ireland? You could not make it up if you wanted to. So I'm just having a quick look here. Hannah's saying online learning and the use of Teams gave her great access as a single mum and a full-time student who also had to homeschool and care for 2 young children. Absolutely. I think for each and every one of us, what we have found really is that COVID and transformation of our lives have meant that we've all had to pull on every resource that we've got to thrive and survive, both in work and personally. So I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen, and I want to sort of encourage you now to think about, what are modern dimensions of career development? Have a little think about that and maybe put something in the chat whilst I just go back and resume my presentation.
If you want me to monitor the chat for you at some stage,
oh, that would be great.
I can do that. So just let me know when you want me to do that.
Oh, lovely. Thanks, David. And David, on cue around something that I have spent most of my professional life. I trained as a careers advisor in the 80s, and I've worked in public, I've worked in private, I've worked in third sector organizations. I've also been a policy advisor to ministers here in the UK. And what I do know for sure, regardless of where you are, that data analytics and impact are becoming now really, really important, not least because we will find that as the cost of living crisis bites harder, for many of us, what we're going to find is that we are going to have to explain why, for example, a higher education career service would benefit from more resource as opposed to maybe a counselling or a mental health project that's somewhere else within an institution. That's just just one example. And across Europe, I've been involved in something called CareersNet. And if you're new to this whole area of career development, say you've been in HR and you've made the switch over, there's an organization called Cedefop, and they've produced these two really, really good expert collections. But they've also got something called CareersNet. And you can go into CareersNet and you can have a look at how countries across Europe are actually approaching this whole business of lifelong guidance, lifelong support systems. And I think one of the things I will come back to is to sort of encourage you to think about how are you using data analytics and impact to make yourself more visible as a professional, or as a student to make yourself more visible around knowing, in a sense, some key facts that is a skill that you will develop as an individual. So David, how's the chat looking there? Have we got any comments on the modern dimensions of career development?
I suppose from my point of view, while people maybe come into that, it's really interesting to sort of explore, I suppose, how we enable students with the complexity of society and the complexity of life to negotiate their way through universities with the academic pressure they're under, probably having to work and probably having to undergo sort of a number of sort of different professional and personal developments. I mean, I think very much self-confidence and self-efficacy, which Dave Martin mentioned here, is really central to that. And I don't know what your view is around those sort of personal attributes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've got to find lots of different ways of measuring impact. Now, we're going to have a great chance to have roundtable discussions. So I'll just share with you what I think modern dimensions of career development are. And this is just to give you some insight to the breadth of what modern dimensions involve. And it can be anything from, on the left-hand side, which are all about blended services, online and offline, towards the other side of the spectrum around mental health and well-being issues. Or it could be work experience and internships, or indeed maybe destinations, which is what we traditionally think of higher education institutions as being particularly good at. So one of the key things really, and this is really a slide from my colleague Anne Wilson at the University of Warwick. And I think maybe Bernard mentioned this, although he didn't say the word explicitly. But think about the importance of belonging. This generation of students, even though they had maybe good grades from high school, they don't feel maybe that they belong there. Perhaps university is welcoming, but many people get imposter syndrome sometimes, or they've maybe studied remotely and it's been difficult to feel a sense of belonging. I think secondly, there's some findings from a 2032 report where students were basically saying that career support's great and comprehensive if you know what you want to do with your life, but it's less helpful if you're not sure what you want to do. And of course, we need to think around, for transformation and innovation, where do students actually go for in terms of career support? And here again is just an example from a study in the UK about, for opportunities, 19%. Google's their first choice at 20%, and advice and guidance is the first choice at 20%. So it tells us basically also opportunities to connect with employers. What all of this tells us very briefly is that students actually do want a human-centered approach. They want a blended approach. And they do actually want to be able to use the technology to help themselves. So I'd like you to think about what are the future opportunities for the HE Career Services. And I'm going to quickly move in to really my introduction to the digital challenge that and opportunities that I think lie ahead. And I'm hoping that my colleague Andy Coates will have joined us. So very quickly, in one slide, all I want to say really is that I believe that institutions now are actually in need of authority and decision-making being distributed through a group of self-organizing teams. I think it was Gavin who talked at the beginning about communities of practice within the association. This is excellent, because I do think that rather than time being invested in a management hierarchy, that people have been empowered now to actually be able to work in lots of different settings. And the important point is, how can you tap into those individuals' talents and skills to actually create a really, really great careers service? Now, I'm going to just introduce 5 principles for innovation. SMART: generate, collect useful information and share it. Human: serve the needs of the people and capitalize on their capabilities and give them agency. Inclusive: how are you going to identify the people who are losing out? It's great servicing the people who have already got lots of social capital, but what about those who are losing out? And how are you going to tailor to their needs? And how are you going to anticipate change and be future orientated? And are you willing to test and learn, have experimental approaches? Now, in this context, and I'll just stop sharing my screen now for a second. I want to, can you still see my screen?
Yeah, we can see you, Deirdre.
Great, brilliant. So I want to, at this point, I want to introduce my colleague, Andy Coates. And the story is that in 2020 at lockdown, I had submitted an application to Nesta, which is an organization that focuses on innovation, and they had something called a Career Tech Challenge. And I had a seed of an idea along with a colleague back in 2014 as a result of working in public employment services in Europe and the UK, that chatbots were on the develop a chatbot, someone else would develop it for them. And I was very fortunate to receive funding to take a seed of an idea along with 4 other colleagues and Andy to create CC, the Careers Chatbot. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a little demonstration just as an illustration of how careers information, advice and guidance is actually rapidly changing and the different ways that people access these services. So over to you, Andy, if you can hear me okay.
Morning, everyone. Yes, I can hear you, Deirdre.
Fabulous.
So I'll go about sharing my screen.
Just while you're sharing your screen, we're kind of moving into that second or third part of the presentation, which is how digital savvy are you? And what sort of tools are you using? And can you use a platform like this in your networking to share some really great tools with others?
Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen okay there. So as Deirdre says, this is CC the chatbot, so something we've been developing over, well, a number of years now. And essentially, it's a careers advice hub where users can self-navigate and find information out for themselves. Typically, this is branded for a particular organization. That might be a college or a university or some other training provider. But today I'll take you through the demo version, which obviously has our CC styling. So when CC first loads, it'll ask a series of questions, and these questions we can customize on a customer basis. And I'll start by giving it a little bit of information. So some of these questions are for sort of data capture purposes. Other ones, for instance, like age, we use to tailor the content that the bot produces. So for instance, if I say I'm under 16, what we do is swap out some of the more technical terminology for simpler phrases and explanations of things. So location is one of those bits of information that is really helpful because obviously we can provide regionalized content. So this is the top level topics that CC can talk about. So beneath these topics, there's lots of subtopics. So we have things like applying for jobs, apprenticeships, courses, self-employment. And I won't take you through all of these, but I'll take you through a selection. So to begin with, let's have a look at finding out about jobs. And I'll say I'm interested in becoming a nurse. Now, one of the things we've tried really hard to do with CC is to make this as easy to use as possible, especially on mobile devices. And one of the things I think everyone's aware of, that it can be difficult to type accurately. So we've spent time on things like making sure the autocomplete is really tolerant of the input. So you can see here I've spelt nurse very badly, but it still has an idea what I'm trying to get at. So CC will show a little bit of information about that particular job, and it'll pull in a relevant case study video as well, showcasing people that have worked in that particular career. We can then dig a little bit more deeply down into specific topics. So we could have a look at pay, for instance. And it'll show the average pay for the whole of the UK. And then it'll also pull in the average salary for my particular region. We also have skills. And this will show a series of charts. I'm not sure how easy you'll be able to see these on the presentation. But it's a selection of skills, personal attributes, and knowledge that an individual will need in order to be successful in this particular career. So it can be really helpful for just starting to think about whether this is the right kind of job for me and what areas I might need to work on. We also have future opportunities. So this is a projection over the next 30 years of what the estimated demand for this particular occupation is going to be. So in this case for nursing, actually it's a pretty good trajectory, rising slightly over the next 30 years. So for this particular job, I can have reasonable confidence that there are going to still be jobs available by the time I finish training. So another thing that we can do is discover jobs that we might like. So this is a skills quiz, and it presents a series of simple scenarios that we have the option of reacting to positively or negatively. So you can see here, build kitchen cabinets, develop a new medicine, and I won't put real answers in for all of these, but I'll skip through to show you the kind of results that this produces. So it'll come back with a series of personal attributes ranked from top to bottom, and it'll show basically how closely my individual traits and personality align with these. So for instance, enterprising, and it'll give us a little bit of description about that particular attribute. Realistic, conventional, social, investigative, and artistic. So that can be a really nice way of the user, especially for young people, discovering a little bit more about their personality and therefore thinking about what kinds of jobs may be suited to them. And to get them started, we also include, based on those results, a series of suggested jobs to start considering. So if I pick one of these, air transport operatives, gives you a bit of description about the job, some common tasks, and the sort of day-to-day job, what qualifications you might need to enter this particular occupation, and alternative job titles as well, which can be quite useful if you're searching on job boards. And then it also shows us the average pay and typical working hours. Because I've been using CC for a while, it's asking for a bit of feedback. So the other things that we can have a look at is we can have a look at courses. And I'll say I'm interested in social care. So it's pulled in a series of courses saying there's 20 courses within 15 miles. So I can flick through these, have a look at where they are. So this one's Hill Road in Exeter. And also most of these will have a link off to the college or training provider's website where I can view a few more details. Also, we can do things like change the distance, how far I'm prepared to commute, and change the location. Finally, we can have a look at one of the features of the bot is that we can essentially pass over control to a human. So depending, again, on the organization that we're working with, we can filter and change these as required. But in the demo version, we've got signposting off to free career support services. And also we've got some curated paid for support services. So we're ensuring we're passing users off to reliable sources of information and support. And finally, one of the key features is we can pass the details over to a careers advisor if the organization that we're working with has in-house staff. So it'll ask me for a little bit of information, email address and phone number. And it'll ask me as well if there's any other information that I'd like to pass to the advisor. So at this point, we will send this information off to either an email address or a third-party CRM or ticketing system. So as a quick example, this is one of the emails or an example of the email that will get passed across to the advisor. So it has basic contact details, some personal information about the user, any notes that they've or questions they want to ask. In this example, there isn't any jobs, but if I've looked at jobs through the chatbot, those will be listed there, and also the topics within the bot that I've looked at. And the aim really is just to provide a warm handover, so a careers advisor has something to go on straight away, and they're not having to ask all of those questions all over again, and the user doesn't get frustrated that they're having to supply the same information. So that's a brief overview of the bot. Obviously, we'll take questions in the chat, and Cici and Deirdre will be around afterwards as well. I don't know, Deirdre, if you're there. Do you want me to show the dashboard as well? Would that be useful?
I'm just mindful of time, Andy. If it's a quick and easy, just let's have a quick glimpse, just so that it links in with what I was saying about data analytics and impact. So yeah, let's just show that there is a, if you like, there's an impact mechanism here that sits behind the bot around being able to capture anonymized data that gives us trends about what occupations are people in a certain area looking for. And one of the reasons we were really keen to do this is that labour market intelligence now, because of the pandemic, much of labour market intelligence was based on historical data. And now what we're looking at is how can we actually get contemporary data built up so that we can advise clients really well. So thank you for that, Andy. That's great. That's and right. I see there's a couple of questions in the Q&A. which I will just take very briefly. Trevor's saying, what would you say to the question of chatbots, robots, or AI taking staff jobs? I think what I would basically say is that there's a clear recognition that a single service simply can't deliver the levels of personalized support that many thousands of students or young people or adults might want and expect. And this is where transformation is so important in innovation, because the need for human-centered, the need to speak to humans will never disappear, in my view. And if anything, this is just a tool, one of many tools, and I'm going to show you 3 other tools very quickly. So I don't think that it will ever take staff jobs, but what it will mean is that staff will need to kind of have that digital agility to be able to combine new techniques in everyday work. Fanula is saying, with CC, can it pull information worldwide based on student location, or does it need career service personalization? I think technically it can pull information in from wherever is needed. And in terms of career service personalization, actually the bot is personalized by addressing the person by its name and also modifying the language. At the present, it's only used in the UK, but we have got some links in Germany, France, and Spain who are interested. So thank you very much, Andy. If I'm going to quickly move back and share my presentation, we've got about, I want to sort of make sure I finish in, say, 5 minutes or so we can take more questions. Let's just go now from this slide. So there was mention of Woebot. I think David mentioned Woebot. Woebot's a mental health ally, if you like. It's a bot that's there to sort of help with your mental health. There's also Rue. Hey, I'm Rue. It's a sexual health chatbot. Or there's Walk with Yeshi. Yeshi basically helps you live the experience of what it's like to have to walk to get water. And everybody loves the world's first robot lawyer, which helps you to be able to contest the parking tickets that you get as one of its facilities. So this is why careers, innovation and transformation is so important. Now, I don't have time to talk about the metaverse, but basically augmented reality, etc. But if you want, and you want to find out more about avatars and how, in a sense, the metaverse is giving us new opportunities to design services that meet students' needs, then have a look at this link after, and you can hear and learn all about the metaverse, particularly in Dublin and what's happened in Dublin. And of course, I was with David and his team last week, and they all put their hands up in terms of using QR codes now, which are commonplace. So I'm just inviting you to sort of think about your technology, your technological skills and your interests. And before we sort of take some questions, just very quickly, I know from the work that I've been doing internationally and here in the UK, that actually we have to build brighter futures for people. And I've been very privileged to be working with the Canadian Career Development Foundation, Careers Wales, Skills Development Scotland, and the Life Role Development Group in Canada. And what we've been doing is looking at practitioner developing a toolkit, which will be launched on the 6th of July. But I just wanted to say, there are distinctive approaches to how you can measure students' well-being or individuals' well-being. And there's 2 approaches that the Canadians have used, where they use a series of 5 key statements. And if you want to have a look at this outside of the conference, you might find it quite helpful in terms of thinking about how you are connecting with well-being conversations with your students. But in Canada, what they found was they developed something called the MO5 scale. And basically, they looked at if you have a careers intervention, a before and after, and you can see here the red line shows that people are able to maybe cope more, they've got a higher level of satisfaction, maybe their relations are a little bit more positive. And we did a separate experiment, but it was part of a collaborative approach, where in Scotland and Wales, we asked adults 18 plus these 5 key statements. And what we did, instead of doing a pre and a post interview, we did a post and a pre, and you can read all about this outside of the conference if it's something that interests you. But these were the words that were expressed by adults, and you might find this in an HE context: worried about finances, embarrassed, maybe feeling worthless, feeling lost. And from the statements, we carried out a study. And if you just have a quick look at the purple here and the yellow, look about how people were responding to some of these statements. You know, I feel my life is meaningful and I can make a difference to my family. Look at the purple around not true. Or I feel optimistic about finding relevant and valued work. Not true. Look at the difference when they saw a careers advisor. Look at the difference in terms of the progress, the impact that that had made. And we saw a similar trend in Scotland. So part of that, we've developed a 10-stage interview process, which I'm not going to go into now, but just to say that if in this conference you're interested in well-being and you're interested in how to get those sensitive conversations going, then the toolkit might be useful. And I hope that you're willing to take risks like this brave lady did in terms of being the first to take the vaccine here in the UK. We've all got to be willing to take risks and to try new things. We've got an international conference coming up on the 6th to the 8th of July, which you're very, very welcome to join us. And I hope that what I've done today is, in a very small way, I hope I've encouraged you to take action and to really think about your practice. And as a student, think about how you can be empowered to use those wonderful talents and skills that you've got. So I will just stop sharing and see how we are doing for time. Time is always the enemy, David.
Yeah, we've a couple of minutes yet. So a rather big question, I think. We could probably spend hours and hours talking about it, but would you have any top tips for anybody wondering about how they would go about measuring the impact of a HE Career Centre?
Yes, I do think there's a whole range of different ways in which you can do it. I think, first of all, you need a framework. You need to have a clear framework that everyone in the team understands. You know, that can be career age, it can be a framework that you think would work best. Even just something as simple as five statements that you actually engage your students in actually trying to see really what their feelings are, what their motivation is, how you can improve. And it goes back to that point that Bernard made that really resonated with me about that sort of psychological aspect. So measuring isn't just about quantity, it's about quality. And if anyone wants ideas on frameworks, very happy for you to contact me afterwards. But what I would say is, if you don't start measuring, if you don't start being confident about the impact of your service, you probably will find that others will get more resources than you because they will be sort of ahead of the game. And the big message in measuring impact is you must co-create with your students or with your employers or with your academics. What a colleague said earlier, oh, I'm really busy, you know, getting these students these great placements, but maybe I need to be a bit more attentive to working with the academics so they understand what we're doing. And it's getting that balance right between knowing that you can gather evidence and not only you say it made a difference, but I find the best way is that other people say what fantastic service you are. And you don't have to say anything, but you've got your safety net of your data there if there is a challenge.
Okay, Deirdre, thanks so much. I think on behalf of everybody in the session today and AHECS more generally, Thanks very much for coming over virtually and sharing your experience and your knowledge with us. I think it's always great to talk to somebody with vision and with such breadth of experience. I think we'll probably be picking up with you on various things in the future. So that's our session ended, Deirdre. Thanks very much. And to everybody else, we'll now be handing over to the next session. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And yeah, I'll look forward to seeing you this afternoon, bouncing around the tables. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone, and it's Catherine here from Technology and an executive member of AHECS. Thanks to Deirdre there for a really interesting session where lots was mentioned around measuring data, and I suppose and our next session, we're delighted to be able to welcome Sybil and Lisa Morris from Sybil to their work in terms of engaging and getting data and feedback from students in the Irish HE sector around their engagement with career services. So just, I suppose, for those of you, we're all very familiar with this, but just to give you a quick overview, Sybil is a leading student market research consultancy based in the UK and in Ireland, providing employers, universities, professional bodies, researchers with insights into students' career thinking. Work supports attraction, equality, diversity, brand management, virtual engagement, how to manage talent as well for career services planning. And at this particular session, Lisa is going to take us through the 2022 Irish graduate research. So that was a survey of over 18,000 Irish students. So really interesting for us to find out from our particular context as well. Just a little bit of an overview on Lisa. Lisa is the head of research at Sybil, and she has over 5 years of research experience across a range of sectors and a particular focus in on the early careers market. So Lisa, we're delighted to have you here today, and over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. As was said, that I'm going to be going through some of our research that we have in the graduate market, and specifically in Ireland. So I've got some slides to share with you, so hopefully you can see them in the on your screens now. But what essentially we do in Sybil, just to give you a bit of background, is that we are part of the wider company of GTI. So you may have heard of GTI, and what we really do there, it's kind of an umbrella company that hosts Target Connect, Grad Ireland, as well as Target Jobs based in the UK. And Sybil is a market research consultancy that falls under that. And so what we do there is we really focus on early careers research. And so what I mean by that is we survey school students right from the age 12 right through to university students, and then recent graduates as well. We do that because we really want to get a really good understanding of essentially the student early careers market, what careers they're looking into, and that can help employers, but also university career services and institutional career services. So in Ireland, we basically have one of the largest studies of its kind. We survey over, well, tens of thousands of students each year. This year, it was just under 19,000 students from a range of institutions, basically almost all of those higher education institutions in Ireland. It's from across all year groups, as well as all of the demographic groups are included. And because we have such a high sample size, that means we can do quite a lot of different data cuts and get some really interesting insights out of it. It's conducted between October and January. So really that first term of the academic year tends to be when students are most active in their careers, but also when employers are thinking about hiring the most graduates, but also when there's kind of the heaviest demand on the career services as well. So that's really why we do it then, to reflect that period. I should say we also weight the data by institution and gender. And really what I mean by that is we look at all of the proportion of students on a population level in Ireland. We split that by gender, and we try and make that as representative in our survey as possible. So we make sure those proportions align. And so the bottom line of all of this is that we have a truly representative survey for you in the Irish graduate market. Now, to get this incredibly large sample size, and we do get help, and we get help from a number of institutions in Ireland, and we're constantly trying to get as many of these partnerships on board. So a lot of you on the call today we will have partnered with, and the way that really works is you help us promote the survey in any way that is best for you, and we help you do that. We provide all the materials for you to do that. And then if you collect more than 100 responses, that's great for you, because what essentially that means is you get free data on those students and independent research on your own students, and then that can be benchmarked against the national average. So that's essentially the relationship we have with different institutions, and that really helps us get that large sample. But I guess and that's sort of the background out of the way, but what you really want to know is what students are thinking. And so this here, I'm going to give you some really exclusive insights in what students want. First of all, I'll be giving you that overview of the candidate market, that graduate market. We'll be thinking about then how to engage those students, how to get them really active in looking at careers. And then we'll look at specifically with that, the career service, how they use that. And then finally look at essentially what they want in a career, what motivates them, and then what influences them as well. So starting off with the overview of the graduate market, what I really wanted to start off with is this stat here. So we asked students, do you think it will be tough to get a graduate job in the following years? And what's really shocking about this is over half of students, 1 in 2 students, feel like it will be tough to get a graduate job. And so really, I think what that's saying is that there's this real uncertainty about, or feeling of anxiety around applying for jobs, looking for that right graduate job for them, and that then has an impact on those career services, on what they apply to, what industries they go into. When we think about those industries, again, we track that in our survey, and this slide here shows their interest for this year in that pinky colour versus last year in that purpley colour. And I think what's really interesting about this year is that the likes of those really innovative industries, so technology and science, that had a lot of good publicity over the pandemic, with the vaccine publicity, the feeling of how all this virtual tech is sort of getting us through the pandemic with the use of Zoom and etc. The fact that we're here sitting in a virtual conference as well, that wouldn't have happened without the pandemic, and that I think was really grown interest in those industries. Whereas the likes of the public sector, which is normally number one, it comes up number one every year, it's seen as really a job secure employer, that is still very much an overwhelming attractive industry to go into because of that job security. However, it's sort of being overtaken by those more growing industries, and the opposite end of that is maybe more of those traditional job sectors, so like banking and accountancy, they're decreasing. So there's definitely this shift towards certain industries through the pandemic. What's also interesting is when we look at just the general number of students in higher education, and this is from the Higher Education Authority, so not our sample data, this is actual population stats for you. You can see there that the number of students each year in Ireland is increasing, and actually this year, between that 2019 and 2020 academic year to the 2020 and 21 academic year, it's the biggest increase that we've seen in the last 5 years. So really what this means is more and more students are going to university, more and more students are then going into that graduate market, and then that ultimately means it's going to be more students that you need to engage and get them thinking about careers, get them applying to the right jobs for them. And how do you engage these students? Well, when we look at our survey data, what we find is YouTube is overwhelmingly the main social media that students interact with on a careers level use. When we ask this question for personal use as well, YouTube is also the top for personal use. But when we look specifically for careers related, YouTube is the top, followed by Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. What is interesting about this is all of these platforms have really been increasing in careers-related use year on year. However, this is the first year we haven't seen that massive jump. It's either stayed the same, in some cases ever so slightly decreased. Only really Instagram is the only one that's sort of shown that slight increase. These are very marginal differences though. But ultimately, I think what the take home from this, because it's the first year, it hasn't shown that ultimate jump in increase in use. There is this general kind of leveling off, or maybe slight, not using or engaging as much as they were in previous years. And I think a lot of this is to do with essentially the virtual world that we have in the pandemic. So talking to employers and career services, colloquially, what we found, or what we heard, was that last year in particular, that first term of this year anyway, there was a general lack of sort of engagement. It was harder to get students to attend webinars or go and talk to their careers advisor, or even just apply for jobs, because the year before, when, if you cast your mind back to the peak of the pandemic, when everyone was sitting at home with nothing really much else to do, students were applying to everything. Applications went off the roof. Whereas this year, especially in that kind of first term, there was other things to be doing, and I think that really led to a decline in engagement. And the number one thing when we asked students what that barrier was, is that it was less personal and engaging. So the feeling that there isn't someone, a real person to interact with and talk to, that's what essentially half of students say. As well as things like just Zoom fatigue. So the obvious things you would think of, oversaturation of those events, 2 in 5 students cite that as a barrier to virtual activities. What is also really interesting is about a third cite internet and connection issues. So actual just physical barriers, as well as those just apathy and just less engaging reasons. And we sort of see this when we look specifically at careers fairs. So when we ask them their preferences over this particular activity, what do you want? Do you want that in person, or do you want that virtually? And overwhelmingly, they say, no, I want it in person, regardless of whether it's at my institution or regardless of whether or not it's just specific to my subject. They prefer that in-person careers fair. If it is going to be virtual, they do prefer it to be subject specific, less so to be specific to their institution. But this is ultimately preferences. And again, if you cast your mind back to that first term of this academic year, a lot of things were still virtual. And that's when we, do ask them, what have you engaged with from across these range of career activities? What we found is, across all of them, they were proportionally more likely to have used it virtually than in person. Again, this is definitely not a preference. This is more of just what was available at the time. And I think what's really key to note is about 1 in 10 students didn't engage in their career activity at all. So they didn't pick any one of these as saying that I have used them either in person or virtually, which really is quite a high number. And across the board, we have seen, again, like what I was saying, this lack of engagement this year. So across the board, what we saw previous year is that students were using a lot more of these. They probably engaged with just about all of them, if not most of them. Whereas this year, they're being a bit more selective, a bit more targeted, maybe only doing 1 or 2, and then actually that 10% there and not doing any. But like I said, if they did do it, they're more likely to do it virtually. And again, that's probably because that was what was available to them. However, when we look specifically at career services, what's really good to see is that basically all students have used at least one aspect of their university's career service or institution's career service. Predominantly, it is those things like, viewing jobs or placements and internships. So, just that very practical side of things, of just finding a job. But also just things like engaging with their careers information, so finding out about things. Also activities embedded in the curriculum, used for other services or tools is also quite high. But in general, what's really important to point out here is that those returning students are more active or more likely to use their career service than those first year students. Again, I think that's probably what you would sort of expect. Those first years just finding their feet, maybe not as in tune to thinking about those internships or summer placements or their careers, whereas definitely those returning students are a bit more switched on. And that is what we see in our data as well. But those students that haven't engaged, what are the reasons behind that? Why haven't they used one of these services? And really what I think is the good news about this is that a lot of these things have decreased this year. So yes, the fact that students are too busy is the main barrier. Yes, they're still unsure about what you know, what their career prospects are, that makes it hard to engage. You know, those are the main reasons that come up top most years and will probably continue to come up top, because, you know, those are just general physical, you know, practical reasons not to. But I think what's really interesting to point out is, you know, when you look at just, I'm not aware of these services, that's gone down. Services that are, you know, offered are not relevant to me, that's gone down. You know, I'm too busy has also gone down. So a lot of these have gone down. And ultimately what that means is, instead of citing a lot of these options or more than one of these options, they're deciding fewer of them. So there's less practical or less obvious reasons or barriers not to use the career services. I've highlighted that middle one there in grey. So thinking about my career prospects makes me feel anxious. And I think that's really important to highlight, because it's one of the few ones that hasn't decreased. You know, it's still the same levels of students thinking, you know, feeling that anxiety around their careers that were this year to last year. I think it's really going to be interesting to see how this changes in the coming years as well. But that's incredibly important to note. You know, that level of anxiety that students feel about thinking about their prospects is ultimately, you know, stopping them from using services, and you know, getting to the bottom of that, of why they're anxious, or even just, you know, knowing that they're anxious to then help them think about their careers can really help students. It's also worth noting that different demographic groups feel this way in different ways. So females are, you know, more likely to feel this way, particularly those high socioeconomic fields, females, than compared to that kind of average. Whereas males, and particularly those Asian males, much less likely to feel anxious than that kind of total population. When we ask them specifically, though, how satisfied you are with your career services, what's really nice to see is there's been an increased level of overall satisfaction in career services. I think this is really good to point out, because last year we did see a drop. I think that was definitely a pandemic related drop, definitely due to the issues that everyone really faced in the switch to the virtual world very quickly, and that, you know, we saw from our survey data that it did have an impact on satisfaction levels in students. But, you know, this year it has improved, you know, from that kind of last year, and is almost on level to those 2020 levels. So that's really good to see. And what's also really good to see is those first years are also slightly more likely to say they're satisfied than total samples. So yes, they're maybe not engaging as much, but those that do, you know, are being satisfied with their service. So, you know, that's really nice to see. But when they're like engaging and when they're thinking about these careers, you know, what essentially do they want? How do you then help these students? And what's really, again, an interesting pandemic related trend is an increase of students thinking, or an increase proportionally anyway, of students being open to moving anywhere in Ireland. So this feeling that it's tough to get a job has really led them to be more open or more broad with moving anywhere. If they get that job, yes, they're happy to move for it. Much less likely to stay in their place of study. I don't know how much of that is because, you know, with a lot of virtual working, they're less likely to move to their place of study and have an affiliation there. So there's definitely this opposite trend of, you know, being open to move anywhere, less likely to stay in their place of study, but also more likely to stay in their home region, so, you know, want to be closer to their family. So again, pandemic-related changes have sort of influenced the things that students are looking for in their job. One of the other things they look for in an employer is essentially the support that they're going to get when they start. And so the top thing that comes up here is finding a buddy or mentor, and that's for, you know, both low, high socioeconomic students. And so that's really a feeling of, you know, getting that peer-to-peer support, someone to advise them, help them through their career. That's really important to students. I think what's also really important to highlight, and again I've highlighted it in grey, is those low socioeconomic students. So either have sort of means testing funding, don't have parents that went to university, went to like a non-fee paying school versus fee paying school. You know, they're proportionally more likely to feel that they need more support from employers than those high socioeconomic students. You know, particularly around their mental well-being, particularly around financial aid for remote working and relocation support. So again, this is thinking about, well, students from different backgrounds are going to need different levels of support, different levels of reassurance when they're looking for those jobs. And I think something else to really point out is essentially what they're looking for in that experience that they can get. So when they're looking for internships, what do they really want to get out of that? The top thing that comes up here is learning skills relevant to their careers, essentially making them more employable. You know, that's the case for Black, white, Asian students. What's interesting here is that, you know, white students are proportionally more likely to say, well, it helps me decide what I want to do and I get some money out of it as well. Whereas those Black and Asian students are proportionally more likely to say, you know, well, I want to secure any graduate job. You know, I want to get those networking opportunities and I want to secure a job with that employer. So essentially that is a bit more, more so than white students anyway. They're saying, well, no, I want practically to get a good job out of this. And if I'm not going to get a good job out of my employer or any other graduate job, I want those networking collaboration opportunities that really then helps me get that job as well. So again, a clear difference in demographics there in essentially what they're needing and what they're wanting to get out of their career. And all of this then leads me on to the motivation behind that. So that was what they want, but really what is causing these motivations to what they want in that career. And again, I think what's really important to highlight is the differences between different student groups. So not everyone is the same. And when we ask students how they feel like their career options are determined by their social background, half of Black students, about 46%, say that they feel that their career options are determined by their social background. So they feel that, you know, their upbringing, their background, where they've come from, you know, really is then going to determine or, you know, really premeditate the opportunities or really the career options that they get. So again, that's thinking about, well, how do you then help those students versus other students, you know, knowing that they're going to feel this way, what increased opportunities can you get them to help support them through their career journey? And I think what's also important to highlight is then their confidences and their skills that they have behind this. And one of a really clear differences with gender here. So males are proportionally more likely to be really confident with their problem-solving skills, even their tech skills, their leadership skills, because they have more confidence in these skills, that they're more likely to go on to jobs that will really, or professions that really embody these skills. So things like technology, engineering, these are all much more popular with males in our survey, but also on a kind of population workforce level, we do see that. Whereas those females I've highlighted in grey there, they're more confident in their communication skills, their creativity skills, their organisation skills, even versus being more self-driven. And again, that leads them to those industries, you know, those public sector industries, those media industries, those hospitality industries. You know, we again see that in our survey preferences. We again see that in the workforce preferences. So this is again thinking about, well, how does confidence and skills lead different people to different professions? And they might not be realizing they're doing that, and they might then be isolating themselves from a whole profession that they're actually pretty good at, because this is just a measure of their confidence, not necessarily a measure of their ability. And another way that things can be put, students can be put off into applying for jobs is assessment processes. So you know, students have to go through lengthy assessment processes, and if they dislike something or causes them to drop out, that essentially excludes them from a job. And this is what you can see in this slide here. So students prefer those face-to-face interviews, those online application forms, you know, those are relatively easy to do, can get help and advice from, but it's those face-to-face interviews and those face-to-face assessment centres are much more preferred than those virtual assessment centres or even those recorded video interviews. So a very clear difference between that really personable approach where they can go into an employer's office, you know, see what the environment's going to be like, get a kind of idea of what that company is going to be like to work for, and that really helps them make a decision. Whereas the opposite end of that spectrum, those virtual assessment methods, those recorded video interviews, students don't really like as much. It's not as engaging. We do see that in our upper end responses, that they just feel like it's not relevant to them. It's really impersonal. It's bad communication. It's really awkward. It's stressful. And those are all things that put students off. Those recorded video interviews specifically, but also a lot of the other virtual, it could be attributed to a lot of the other virtual assessment methods. And I would probably also say it probably can be attributed to a lot of those virtual careers events as well. Something else to really point out here is, again, those students with a disability are highlighted in the kind of more turquoisey greeny colour there. And what you can see is those students are sort of, you know, dislike just about all assessment methods more so than that average, that total average. And what that really means is those students, find it more difficult to go through the process, dislike the process of going through a job application more so, I should say. And what that really means is, again, those students could be, isolating themselves from jobs that they could otherwise be applying for. And it's, again, thinking about how as a career service or an employer or whoever can really kind of tap into these students without putting them off. And so that is the last slide that I have for you. So that was just a very few key snapshot of exclusive insights really of our data. So to give you some key takeaways, what we found is more confidence in securing a graduate job this year, particularly around those kind of science and technology industries. However, in general, half of students do think it is going to be tough to get a job next year. They're narrowing their career interests. So, we saw those sectors, really decreasing, although they are more open to moving anywhere in Ireland for a job. And they are less engaged because of those lack of in-person events and that Zoom fatigue. However, the use and satisfaction of university career services has increased, and those students with a disability are more likely to drop out of the recruitment process. So again, may need more encouragement. So that's all I have for you today. Just a few more minutes to go, but I just wanted to say thank you for having me, and that many of you on the call today are actually already partners with us. This is essentially just an exclusive insight of the research for you. And my colleague Bethany is going to be in touch with everyone who's partnered with us in a few weeks' time about getting you those specific data cuts. So yeah, thank you to everyone.
That was great, Lisa. Thanks so much for taking us through such a rich and varied data set there with plenty of information, which I think will be really useful for the roundtables later on this afternoon when we're looking at, I suppose, the themes there. Your last slide did my work for me in terms of summing up the key takeaways. There were some questions that came in the Q&A, and they were particular in some of them to some slides, but just around the engagement level is a popular area in the area of LinkedIn, Lisa. Have you any stats, or did you measure the engagement with LinkedIn, and where did it feature if you did?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we don't include LinkedIn in our social media question because we tend to find that students don't really see it as much as a social media and more as a website. So we don't have specific stats for you on that. It is something that we consider every single year, and we've got a lot of feedback on this. So we're looking to add it for next year and have more stats around that for you.
Great. Then the area of question, I think, was at the beginning of the slides around the 56%, and the question around, was that across all years of study, from Gavin there, Lisa?
Yeah, so that is you're talking about it will be tough to get a job next year. So yeah, that was everyone in the survey, so across all year groups. It is probably likely to change by later years. My suspicion will be that later years, those final years, will say that it's going to be harder to get a job because they're sort of actively looking. But that is an assumption that I've just made. I'll need to check the data for you.
Okay. Then a question in terms of the option of remote working, and if that was brought up at all in the survey.
Yeah, so remote working is a question we actually asked last year, and what we found is students were they sort of wanted that wonderful world of hybrid working where they could get some days in the office, some days not in the office, and that is essentially what students say that they want, a combination of both. So it tends to be about 2 or 3 days for remote working. That was their preference.
Okay. Just in terms of some comments there asking around slides being shared, so I'm sure, Lisa, you will share this information with us, and we will in turn as AHECS share it out. There is a query around receiving UK Civil report in Queen's Belfast received the UK Civil report. Would it be possible to share both UK and the Republic of Ireland report with us and other interested AHECS members? Is that something that you're in a position to answer, Lisa?
So that would have to be specific to them. They wouldn't have specific data in our Irish survey because it's in the UK one, but these slides were exclusive, but because everyone's going to be partnering with us and getting those insights, so yeah, that is something we can look into doing for them.
Yeah, So maybe it's something we can discuss at a different date, because I think it's interesting to have both those perspectives in there as well. So really, really interesting chat in the chat function in relation to all of this. So great insights, and thanks, Lisa, and to Sybil for sharing that with us today. To everybody else, it is lunchtime. I'm sure everybody's gasping for their another cup of tea or coffee and their lunch and their sandwiches. So we'll be back online again at 1:45, where we'll be taking up with the more roundtable discussions. So thanks to everybody, and enjoy your lunch break.
Great, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.